Whenever something bad happens in Nigeria, and let's face it, that's almost every day, there's a type of comment that crops up. We need the British. But I think that wishing the British back is naive and pure bullshit. The British were in Nigeria from the late 1800s to our independence in 1960. And while they were here, they did some good things. They brought Western education, built roads and railways, and they stopped human sacrifice. Yay! For years, I'd wondered what Nigeria or Africa would look like if the British had not colonized us.
We are home.
But I think that when people ask the British to come back, this is what they imagine as well. And when they long for the British, I think there are many issues behind that sentiment, but there are two big ones. They imagine that the white man is always competent and infallible, and Nigerians aren't, so we can't rule ourselves. And two, the white man has great buildings, constant electricity and working systems, so the British could have built us a better country than we have now. Let's look at these two concepts. We can't rule ourselves. Looking at Nigeria, you'd think that maybe we weren't meant for this modern world. The evidence is everywhere. And it says emphatically, we cannot lead. But when you look back in history, before the British came, we see a different story. In some ways, an almost unrecognizable Nigeria. In the 1600s, when the Portuguese visited Benin, they met a rich city so well governed that people didn't even bother with doors on their houses. In the 1800s, Kano was compared to Manchester because of the textiles that they both produced. The British didn't take over because we're bad at ruling ourselves, or as they claim to civilize us. Queen Victoria didn't think, you know what, I think we should help these Africans out. They were going through an industrial age and no longer needed the slaves that Nigerians sold to them. They needed resources. First, they traded with us, and then they subdued us and took it by force. And when you take over a land, you break down centuries of leadership structures and stamp your will on the people. The Abas of Benin, the Gwams of the Biroms, the Emirs of the North, the group consensus of the Igbos were all replaced by indirect rule. Indirect rule, a system previously perfected in India by Lord Frederick Lugard, was superimposed over African leadership structures, and it had very disruptive flaws. In Elizabeth Ishichia's A History of Nigeria, she describes a fundamental flaw. There was a complex of weaknesses at the heart of the system. The most fundamental was that the ruler was answerable primarily to his colonial overlord, who alone could dispose him, rather than to the governed. If you're wondering why we seem to be bad at leadership despite our predecessors, this guy explains it much, much better than I could.
I think the colonial impact was twofold. One was the creation of those states, 53 states created out of 6,000 created by foreigners. Africans had no part in their creation. But the other factor, and this is a delicate one, and I tread carefully here, is the destruction of belief in Africa, the lack of self-confidence, the feeling that we can't do it. And I think that was also a result of the colonial impact, because I think it was short enough to destroy leadership in Africa. It was short, but not long enough to replace it with anything else. So the old ways, the old political systems were just wiped out by the colonial impact. And with that, any form of political or cultural leadership was obliterated.
Point 2. They could have built us a better country. From the colonization of Lagos on the 5th of March 1862 to our independence on the 1st of October 1960, the British had a presence in Nigeria for 98 years. Lagos was under British rule for the full 98, while the rest of the country for at least 58. So what did they build during this time? Our colonial masters regarded Nigeria as a commercial enterprise, and what they built reflected this. An example of this can be seen on the map of Nigeria's national railway network, compared to the British. All the railway lines eventually led to the sea, and the produce they transported was taken to build Britain. That network wasn't meant for you if you just wanted to visit your cousin in Boko. In historian A.E. Afikpo's book, The Warrant Chiefs, he quotes a former colonial warrant chief, Obiuku Nze. The government promised us development, but tell me what development there is in Umulolo after more than 30 years of taxation. We often look to South Africa as an example of an African country built by white people. But how are the black people over there faring? Yes, you'd have a developed country, but would you have access to it? Or would you live in its shadow? The British weren't in Nigeria for our benefit, and if they were to return, they still wouldn't be here for our benefit. Our systems are broken, but they can be fixed, and we have it within us to do this. Maybe what we really suffer from isn't poor leadership or bad choices, but the crisis of national low self-esteem, the feeling that we cannot overcome. But when we do overcome, we'll realize that we never needed a white savior.
Because I'm ready to run into the light because I have a black man blood in me. And African people, we are born great. I'm ready for it.